Hey book friends, welcome back to the channel. So today's video is my January wrap-up video. So you guys, I read 8 books. I read 8 books in January, which is a ton for me. That might not seem like a lot, especially compared to some other booktubers. But for me, I read on average like 4 to 5 books a month. And so in January, I had a couple things going on. One, I was participating in a reading challenge that helped me read more books, but I also got swept into a YA fantasy series and I read the whole thing. So I'm going to share that with you today as well. And so you guys, I'm so excited to share what I read. It was such a good reading month. So hi, my name is Angie. Welcome to the channel, or welcome back, all the things. And so like I said, we're going to chat about all the books I read. I read a new release. I'll talk to you about that. I read a couple historical fantasy books, which I'm super jazzed about. I'm really loving that genre. I finished a series. I read a YA fantasy series, and my last one, I read a reread. So let's just start with the new release, because this one surprised me. I feel like of all of these books, I wasn't sure about this one. I was like, it could go badly. So I read the latest Alex Michaelides, I'm not quite sure how to say his name, but it's called The Fury. Now, I really did not like The Silent Patients, which is what he's most known for. And so I was hesitant and I wasn't sure if I would like this, but the premise got me. It had kind of a and then there were none retelling, like isolated island, people start getting murdered sort of idea behind it. I didn't want to know too much going into it. And I was kind of vacillating between a 4-star and a 5-star rating, but I think I'm going to give it a 5-star rating for a couple reasons. One, I really enjoyed kind of the format of the book, how the story was told. It was told kind of it was either 4 or 5 different parts where they told the same story with more detail. I am a sucker for that plot device. I really like learning a little bit more and then filling in gaps and filling in gaps. So I loved that. I also thought the way the story was told, it was kind of told from like a narrator's perspective, where the narrator was like talking to the audience. What I think that's called like breaking the fourth wall, or at least that's what it's called in movies, where the author acknowledges the audience. And that was used in this book, and I thought it was used really well. The actual like narrator character person was a little bit annoying at times, but it was really fun to get more clues and to figure out who this person was and how did they play a role in this overarching story. So I did appreciate that plot device, using that kind of narrator to talk to the audience. I think it's really unique and I thought it was really fun. But the main thing I really enjoyed was the reveals. I feel like I was there for every reveal. I wasn't sure what was happening, so I was surprised and varying degrees of surprise throughout every reveal. But I also feel like you could have figured it out, which I need in my thriller books. It can't be so outlandish that nobody could figure it out, and I feel like you could with this book. And so what this is about, it's about this retired Hollywood star who owns an island. She has an island and she invites a number of hand-picked friends to this island, and they're supposed to kind of get away and just enjoy the weekend, but things go terribly wrong and someone ends up being murdered by the end of it. I feel like it just kept me guessing the whole time, and I don't want to give you more than that because I feel like it's really worth the wait. It's worth figuring things out kind of bit by bit. And I wouldn't say that the characters were really likable, but I also wouldn't say they were wholly unlikable either. There was some interesting parts to all of the characters, even as you kind of march further in the story and learn a lot more about some of these characters. I would say I wasn't like really put off by them, which is what can kind of sometimes get to me about thrillers. So yeah, I highly recommend it. You should definitely give it a shot, especially if you like that isolated setting and a group of close characters and their backstory, really figuring out their backstory and then figuring out what's going to happen next because of that backstory. So The Fury by Alex Michaelides, I highly recommend it. Okay, so the next 2 books, I don't know which ones I want to talk about first, but I read both of these in January. So Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, as well as What the River Knows by Isabella Bañez. You guys, they're both so good, and I love that these authors actually know each other or something like that, and they kind of help each other out, and they're very similar styles. They're both what I would call historical fantasy. So let me just start with Divine Rivals since it's more popular. So Divine Rivals is, I mean, most people have heard about it, but what intrigued me and made me want to pick up this definitely hyped book was the fact that it is historical fantasy. It very much feels almost like a World War I or World War II historical fiction story throughout a lot of the story, which kind of gave it more seriousness, because this is technically YA, but only I feel like in the age of the characters. I don't feel like there's too many kind of YA tropes. I feel like it's very approachable, and it has to do with these two main characters who are war correspondents, or they work on this newspaper during this war, but the unique part about the war is it's a war of the gods. They are technically rivals at this newspaper. But as the story goes on, they learn some things and they learn about each other, and there is a romantic element that is involved in this plot line as well. I won't go into too much detail on that, but I liked that. What really stuck with me for this book, why I gave it 4 stars, which I forgot to mention, why I gave it 4 stars, is because of how real the stakes felt. It felt very serious. Like, you're talking war, you're talking the trenches, you're trying to understand what's going on. There is a little bit of, you just kind of have to go with it. You're not explained a lot about the war per se or the gods. You kind of are, but it is way more focused on the characters and what's going on with them, as well as the decisions they are making. And so, yes, it's an interesting kind of mesh of historical fiction, some fantasy elements, some romance elements, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very fun, and I actually just recently picked up the second, so I'll be reading that soon. So Divine Rivals was so good. And then, like I said, I picked up this book too. And like I mentioned, actually the 2 authors are friends. I think they have the inscription. Yeah, it says for Rebecca Ross in this book. And I think the other one is for Isabel Ibanez, the author of What the River Knows. And this is also the first book in a YA historical fantasy duology. So they're very similar in nature. The second book for this comes out in November, which, funny enough, when I was reading this, I had no idea there was a sequel until I got to the end, and then I looked it up right away. But this book has to do with our main character of, not Iris, nope, that's the other one, Inez. Inez is in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She's like 17, 18 years old, something like that. Her parents have always been these kind of famous archaeologists who go to Egypt via boats. We're talking, I think, early 1900s time frame, so similar time frame. They're constantly on expedition and leaving her behind in Argentina, and then she finds out that they have mysteriously died, and it just really wrecks her world. And so instead of kind of doing what is expected of her, because she's part of the elite class of people, very wealthy, high expectations on what's like socially appropriate and things like that, she throws caution to the wind and finds her way to Egypt to try to figure out what's going on, what happened to her parents, to mourn them, things like that. But then she gets wrapped up into what they were involved with. Her dad had actually sent her an artifact, and that plays a role in the plot. And it goes from there. There is a little bit of romance in this book as well. It involves kind of her uncle's assistant, and she meets him right off the bat. And I really did enjoy their relationship. I enjoyed the banter. I enjoyed watching her kind of come out of her shell and experience a little bit more of life, but also not be so scared of like her station that she's not willing to kind of push boundaries and get what she wants. So she definitely is kind of a sassy, impulsive main character, but not to the point of ridiculousness, which sometimes I feel like is my struggle with YA main characters. But I would say the fact that both of these books are YA, Divine Rivals, as well as this one, did not affect kind of how I read it. I really enjoyed it. I'm finding that YA can be awesome, you guys. Like, it has just a different feel to it. And sometimes the stakes are lower, but really sometimes I just really like more sweet relationships as opposed to like spicy relationships, which seems to be more of a trend in publishing these days. And don't get me wrong, I will try out those books and I don't mind them, but sometimes I enjoy just sweetness. And so there's more of that in kind of YA, but these both were really fun, and having the historical aspect was just so good for me because, as I've talked about on this channel, I used to read a lot of historical fiction. I was getting burnt out, but I still really do love it, and I love it in just a little bit different ways these days. So I highly recommend that, and I also gave this 4 stars. Forgot to say that. 4 stars. All right, I'll just stick with the YA-ness of this wrap up before I get to my last 2 books, which are adult. But I read through this whole series. I don't have the 3rd one. I listened to it on audio. So this is the Folk of the Air series by Holly Black. The first book being The Cruel Prince, and then The Wicked King, and then The Queen of Nothing is the 3rd one. I read them all. I read them all in like 10 days or something like that. They're super fast, enjoyable reads. And I've always been curious about this series. I feel like it's often recommended. I feel like it's a little divisive. Some people are like, oh, it's terrible. Other people are like, it's the most amazing thing and I really like this main couple. What hooked me with this story was our main female character. I really enjoyed the character of Jude. I enjoyed how she was wrapped up into this world of the fairies. She and her twin sister have really only known this world. They were brought into it at like age 7 or something like that. And so now at 17 or 18, she's older. She's had to kind of be on her guard for her entire childhood. And now she's like at the cusp of trying to like decide what's going to happen later in life, right? But at the same time, there's some political things going on in this world. And again, it's YA, so it's not too difficult. It's a pretty straightforward plot. It's a pretty straightforward world. And in this case, it revolves around this main kind of royal family of the fairies. There's the High King and his children, and the youngest child is her age, and his name is Carden. And he is very cruel. So that's the general setting. And then within kind of this first book, there is a vying for power, and the High King is stepping down, and one of his children are going to take the throne. And Jude gets very much involved due to the fact that she reached a point where she was just tired. She was tired of being like pushed around by these people, and she started fighting back and just doing some kind of crazy things, but yet kind of brave and courageous. I feel like I draw a line in YA reading, or fantasy especially, where the main characters are just ridiculous and making just stupid decisions, and I hate it when those decisions are necessary to move the plot forward. Now for her, I don't know what it was. She's reckless, impulsive, and all of those things, but I also just really felt for her in her position, and I don't know, I really liked the main character, and so I wanted to know what would happen. Of course, this does have some romance, although what I was also drawn to in this one is its very mild kind of spiciness, if you will. It is YA, so it is geared towards teenagers, and I'd say this is appropriately YA, in my opinion. I think this is fine for teenagers. And so, yeah, I don't know what else to say other than, like, I was there for the whole ride. I feel like I was hooked and I wanted to know what would happen. I was just waiting for her to be tricked and to see how that would play out, and just, I know this isn't making as much sense anymore, but I just got swept into the world and I had to read the whole thing. I had to read the whole series just to kind of complete it for myself, to know how it ended, and I really, really enjoyed it, you guys. I think I gave all the books 4 stars. I think for me, this first one might have gotten like a 3.75 and the rest of them were 4 stars. But yeah, I liked it. So I recommend that if you're kind of in that mood, even if you're an older adult like me. I'm like 41 years old, but I still just really enjoyed it, and I'm learning that that's okay this year. I don't know what's going to happen the rest of 2024, but in January, I read a lot of YA. But let's get to the 2 books that are not YA. 2 books that I just love. Okay, the first one is a beast, but I finished Labyrinths Heart by M.A. Carrick. This is the 3rd book in the Rook and the Rose trilogy. Oh, I was so excited to get back into this world. Granted, I had only just read the 2nd one in like December, so I hadn't let much time kind of elapse before picking up this 3rd one, which I highly recommend if you are interested in these books. They're pretty dense, like I've chatted about over my last number of videos when I talk about this series. They're pretty dense. They can be a little hard to understand. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of politics. They do have a glossary, or at least like house and who's in which house in this kind of setting that does help out. You definitely do have to pay attention. I think I've mentioned this in another video. Angela off of Literature Science Alliance did an author interview with these authors, because there's 2 authors in M.A. Carrick, and it really helped me. It helped me explain kind of the world and the different magic systems, because there's a couple different magic systems and a lot of different people groups, because it's kind of loosely Venetian inspired. Like, you have masks and canals in this big city of Nadezhra, where there's 2 main people groups, the people that were there before, and then kind of the conquering ruling party that is currently in charge. They each have their own unique magic systems, and then enter our main character of Ren, who in the first book, because I can't talk about the 3rd one, but in the first book, she comes in as this con artist. She wants to join one of the houses in order to kind of like fleece them and take their money and be able to support herself and her siblings. And so she's running this really long con, and it's really fun to see how that develops. It's fun to see some of the side characters that she meets along the way, that she forms friendships that she's not sure about, but as you start to learn more of her backstory and some of these other really important main characters, their backstory, it really helps flesh out kind of the big world and what is going on in that world. Now, as for the third book, I ended up giving this 4 stars. I gave the other 2 5 stars. What I was feeling about this book was that I felt like, as opposed to the other 2, they had kind of a more cohesive plot, like there was a thing that was being handled in those books. This book more felt like it was wrapping up a lot of the plot, right, of the whole series, which in and of itself, I don't mind, but I felt like it left me a little bit more untethered, like there wasn't something they were all kind of striving for, and some of those things got revealed along the way. It just was wrapping this up, then this up, then this up sort of idea, which can kind of make it not as enjoyable, on top of some of the characters in becoming more vulnerable with each other and friendships and all of that changed a little bit too much of their personalities, and I was a little bit upset with that. So I won't say more than that, and hopefully that doesn't ruin anything. But, you know, all in all, I highly recommend this series, especially if you really enjoy fantasy, high fantasy, just the ability to be in a story that is multi-layered, complex. You can watch some character arcs of these people that they grow and change and trust people and have more of a like found family is definitely highly present in this book. But just those kinds of plot lines is very, very apparent in this book. But 4 stars irregardless. And then the last book I read this month was a reread of a favorite book. So you guys, I read And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This was my first Agatha Christie that really started me into really enjoying her work. Now I read this as part of a buddy read as well as the reading challenge that was part of a Patreon I am part of, which is Gwen's Patreon. I'll link her down below. She's fantastic. How this book reads on reread when you know who did it is so satisfying. It's so much fun. I mean, when I first read it, I'd say that this is one of the best books that made me feel like I was trying to solve it along the way. Like I'm like, oh, I think this person did it. Oh, nope, it's this person. Oh, nope, it's this person. Like I was doing that the whole time I first read this, because this is again an isolated island type story. It is kind of the first of all of those, right? And it's basically where all of these people were invited to an island on various pretenses. They all get there and then they become cut off from the mainland and things start happening. Kind of people start dying, and it is quite intense and quite scary. And actually, I've heard that this is one of the darkest Agatha Christie books that she wrote. And from what I've read so far, because I think I've read like 6 or 7 other books from her, I would agree. This definitely has some darker undertones. Like none of the characters are likable. They all have a backstory, and that's what you're spending the book figuring out, right? You're figuring out, did they deserve to be invited to this island where they're going to be picked off one by one? And then again, like I said, knowing who did it in the end, which is, I feel like one of the most clever reveals of any kind of mystery thriller book I have read. It was so fun to watch it from the very beginning, because this is one of her books that does not have a detective. So it's not a Poirot book. It's not a Miss Marple book. It's a detectiveless Agatha Christie. It's so good. I'm just amazed by how well plotted this book is and how thought out every piece and every person is. And it's so good. So it was a reread, but it still gets 5 stars from me. It's still such an excellent book. So if you haven't read this and you've been curious, because there's so many stinking retellings out there, right? Pick it up. Pick up the original. See what you think. And let me know. Let me know what you think. Reach out to me, because this is like an all-time favorite book of mine, and I could talk about it a lot. So that's all I have for my wrap up. Let me know down below your thoughts on any of these books. You guys, this was one of the best starts to the year I've ever had reading wise. So that's all I have. But otherwise, I hope you all are doing amazing, and I will see you in the next book video. All right, take care.